In the aftermath of Joshua's defeat to Oleksandr Usyk on the weekend, a debate has started. And the topic of this debate is which defeat is worse? Which defeat is harder for Joshua to come back from? The Ruiz loss or the Oleksandr Usyk loss? And in my opinion, I think there's only one clear answer to that. And I'm going to attempt to back it up with rationale. So we're comparing these two defeats. A lot of people, from what I've seen, they say that, or their rationale that the Ruiz loss is worse is because it's a stoppage loss. Well, I take issue with that because if we rewind to that first Ruiz fight, Ruiz won that fight purely based on the fact that AJ made a mistake. He got greedy, he got overzealous. He thought Andy Ruiz was hurt more than he actually was. And he went in, he tried to finish Ruiz. Ruiz wasn't as hurt. He countered Joshua. Joshua went down, tried to claw himself back in the rest of the fight, but Ruiz closed the show after dropping him multiple times. But knockouts really do cause amnesia. That's a saying in boxing, and it's rang true for that fight. Because people forget that in the first, second, and third round, Joshua was giving Ruiz the business. He was piecing him up, he was timing him quite easily. Yeah, Ruiz was coming forward and trying to pressure Joshua, but it didn't amount to much other than Ruiz getting his head snapped back. And so it got to the third round, and Joshua pieced Andy Ruiz up once again, knocked him down, and then we know what happened from there. But then we look at this Oleksandr Usyk loss, and Joshua, this is not hyperbole, this is not exaggeration. Joshua was never in this fight. And there's no excuses. He was never in the fight because Oleksandr Usyk never let him get into the fight. Some people say, oh, Joshua's corner, they didn't adapt and Joshua didn't adapt. I can understand that, but we'll get to that. Oleksandr Usyk outmatched Joshua. He outpointed him, but also at points he was beating him up. He started strong, he finished strong. If you look at that last round, the closing seconds of that 12th round, Joshua was leaning against the ropes, and it was reminiscent of the Klitschko fight where Joshua was hurt, he was dazed, and he was getting hit at will. And that was the story of the fight. And I've done a study on it. You can check, you can look and watch that study. Yeah, Joshua's started on early and he's doing a decent job of keeping up with Oleksandr Usyk. But the gap between his ability and Oleksandr Usyk's ability was as much bigger. And it was too big for Joshua to gap. Even when Oleksandr Usyk had that little dip in activity and kind of coasted a little bit, it was just too much for Joshua to handle. And there's a reason why. The reason is because Joshua has never prioritized his development. Not because, and I don't think it comes from the fact that Joshua has neglected his development. Not because he doesn't care about getting better. He does. Joshua is a meticulous athlete. But the thing is, from very early on in his career, he's been chucked into the deep end. And just because he's managed to, sink or swim, he's managed to swim. And purely because of that, they've seen, okay, this is someone we can take risks with. We can take gambles with Anthony Joshua. Let's put him in this fight. Let's put him in that fight. Okay, this one next, that one next. Win a title, unification. Fill out the stadium. And for us as boxing consumers, as boxing fans, it's great because we're seeing this guy take on the next guy, the next guy, the next guy, the next guy. Titles all the way. And it's great. It's great entertainment. These are the fights we want to see. But from the perspective of someone, and I'm not saying this is me, but from the perspective of someone who, like an assessment of Joshua's development, it doesn't lend itself to him maximizing his success in the long run. And what's the point I'm trying to make here? So Joshua has done a good job of learning as he goes along. But now he's really, he's been operating at the highest level for a long time. But if you want to guarantee your success at the highest level, you need reliability. Your technique needs to be tempered. It needs to be reliable. It needs to be rock solid, steadfast. I think we're starting to see that Joshua, maybe there's going to be a reliance on immediate rematches. And look, losses do not define your career. How you bounce back from a loss does, more so. But are we starting to see a pattern of Joshua, having the belts, losing the belts, having an immediate rematch, winning an immediate rematch, having another fight, losing another fight, having another immediate rematch, and so on? I just think that Joshua needs to prioritize his development rather than the instant gratification and ego boost that winning an immediate rematch will offer. And this is not me being reactionary, because I can tell you for a fact that back in 2019, I was saying that Joshua shouldn't take the Andy Ruiz rematch. And it wasn't because I was worried about Joshua losing. If anything, and I look, take my word for it. So take it or leave it. This is just my word. But people were asking me back in 2019, who's going to win the rematch? I was quite firmly picking Joshua. Why is that? Because not only does Joshua enjoy quite a few advantages over Ruiz, but he lost that fight based on his own error. And so, as such, Andy Ruiz didn't really know how he won, and thus he wouldn't be able to figure out how to win in the rematch. Whereas Joshua, it was so clear why he lost that fight. And if you can identify why you did something, you can then, an error that is, you can then rectify it. And that's what he did. So I never had any doubts about him beating Ruiz in the rematch. Obviously, I didn't have my channel back then, so as I say, it's going to have to take my word. But even then, I didn't want Joshua to take the immediate rematch, because I saw it as a blessing in disguise. This is now your excuse to come away from the main events, take a bit of a pay cut, but then go up against some challenging but slightly lesser caliber opposition to really hone your technique and ingrain it into yourself, so that when you come across a crisis, try saying that loads of times really fast, come across a crisis again, your technique doesn't fail you. You don't revert back to type. But this is precisely what we've seen in the Oleksandr Usyk fight, because following the first Ruiz defeat, Joshua did a good job of reinventing himself, and in the 6 months he completely changed his style, and he won the rematch big. He won it big. For obvious reasons, couldn't fight until last December. Took out Kubrat Pulev in a decent performance. I don't think it was vintage. It was good against a good, serviceable level of opponent in Pulev. But he didn't experience a crisis in the Ruiz rematch or the Pulev fight, whereas he experienced a crisis in the Oleksandr Usyk fight, and we see he reverted back to type. The technique wasn't reliable. It wasn't steadfast. It hadn't been tempered, as I say. And so this indicates that Joshua's development is being hindered because he's still unable to come through a crisis. Or at least, no, Joshua can come through a crisis. Let me take that back, because Joshua is a fighting man. He has heart, but he has enough heart to come through a crisis, but sometimes heart isn't enough, if that makes sense. Sometimes you need, a lot of the time, you need the technique. We've seen so many fighters over the years, they bank on one trump card, but they'll come across someone where that trump card doesn't work. And I think we've seen that against Oleksandr Usyk, because yes, Oleksandr Usyk is the smaller man. He's not a small man, he's just smaller. Come up from cruiserweight. Doesn't have the punching power. There's not a massive gap in between them, Joshua and Usyk, in terms of speed. But we see overall experience is in favour of Oleksandr Usyk. I know Joshua's more experienced at heavyweight, but in terms of overall experience, amateur and pro, you have to give it to Usyk. And with that experience comes a technique that has been tested over time. It's been honed, it's been solidified, consolidated. Oleksandr Usyk, his technique doesn't fail him. He can go up to heavyweight, he's proven it now, and knock off at least one of the main guys. Because Oleksandr Usyk is now, newsflash, he's now unified heavyweight champion. And I don't think that in 6, 7, 8 months, whenever this supposed rematch is going to be, I don't think Joshua can bridge that gap enough. I think this is a different kind of defeat. The Andy Ruiz fight, yes, it's a KO loss. Yes, the KO looks more dramatic than the points loss, but human error exists. Joshua made an error. He made a mistake. Andy Ruiz capitalized on it. Joshua now knows, in the rematch, I don't have to make that mistake. Whereas following this loss to Usyk, people are saying, oh, Joshua needs to impose his strength. He needs to impose his size because he can't outbox Oleksandr Usyk. I'm not convinced that strategy works for Anthony Joshua, because Anthony Joshua has never displayed the disposition. He's never displayed that bully mindset to really dog someone out of a fight and impose himself. Just because that may be the way to beat Oleksandr Usyk, it doesn't mean everyone can just follow that blueprint and have success. Derek Chisora carried out that blueprint, but that's because Derek Chisora has fought like that for many, many years. That's Derek Chisora's game. And so he does that better than most people. Just because Joshua is a high level, like he's an elite level heavyweight, whereas Derek Chisora isn't. But just because there are levels between him and Chisora, it doesn't mean they have exactly the same strengths. It doesn't mean that Joshua's strengths by default are that much better than Derek Chisora's. They have completely different skill sets, completely different attributes, completely different mindsets and dispositions. I don't think Joshua has that disposition to follow that that blueprint. But also, I don't think he can up his skill set I don't think he's got enough time to bridge that gap in terms of skills to meet Oleksandr Usyk. Oleksandr Usyk was in full control of that fight. And so once again, I don't think Joshua should take the immediate rematch. I think he should pump the brakes, take a backward step and focus on his development. Don't focus on the ego. Don't focus on the gratification of winning an immediate rematch. Take your time to develop, prioritize your development, and then come back. Because as long as the belts are there, as long as the 4 belts exist, and there'll probably be more in the coming years, hopefully not. As long as those belts exist, you have a shot at undisputed. There's no rush. And people say, well, how long is he going to stay in boxing? If you carry on taking losses like that against Oleksandr Usyk, that will knock years off your career. Going to have to retire a lot sooner than you think, taking all those punches. But I'm kind of straying off on a tangent here. Yes, you have a KO loss to Andy Ruiz and a points loss to Usyk. The KO doesn't, it looks more dramatic, but that's not it. That was a winnable fight. Made a mistake, paid the price. This Usyk fight is a different type of loss. He wasn't allowed into that fight by Usyk because Usyk enjoys quite considerable advantages over Joshua. And this is not me being reactionary. If you look at my pre-fight videos, I was predicting Joshua, yes, but a lot of that came from the favourable treatment I anticipated Joshua may have. And this was shown because Oleksandr Usyk, I had him winning this fight 10 rounds to 2. Even then, one of the judges, he knows who he is. I don't want to say his name because it pisses me off. He tried to say there was only a 2-point gap between Oleksandr Usyk and Anthony Joshua. Disgusting. So Anthony Joshua, I don't think he has enough time to bridge the gap between him and Oleksandr Usyk. It's a different kind of loss. And at this point, I'm just repeating myself. So that's all from me. I think I've covered everything I want to say. Let me know your take in the comment section. Do you agree with what I'm saying? Do you disagree? If so, please leave a reason why. Don't just be deliberately contrarian. Also, what do you think Joshua should do next? Do you think he should go ahead with the rematch? Do you think, like me, he should back off, fight some other opponents to get some experience points, get his XP up? So if you want to discuss this in the comment section, please do so. If you could like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff helps me out, helps the channel out. We're on our way, guys. Road to 1,000 subscribers. We're getting there. So thank you to all of you. Thanks for watching, or listening rather. I'll catch you on the next video.